All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of ChargeForward with Chargebacks 911, where, as always, we unpack what's new and next in payments, fraud, fintech, you name it. I'm your host, Justin Clements. Today's topic, and that's Visa's new VAMP program. That's right, the Visa Acquire Monitoring Program is here. It's in full effect, and it's changing how fraud and dispute ratios are tracked across the payments ecosystem. But don't worry. We've got the perfect guest to shine a little light on what's lurking beneath the surface. So joining me today are Zach Matthews, Chargebacks 911's Vice President of Solutions Engineering and Partnerships, and Kellen Rayner, Vice President of Sales at Bankful. Together, they're going to help acquirers, gateways, and merchants navigate this new compliance landscape. But, before we dive into all that, because there's a lot to unpack, I want to get to know both of you guys just a little bit better and help our audience understand just a little bit more about you guys, where your passions are, what's led you to be right here today as the experts talking about this. So, Zach, you've been in payments and fraud prevention for quite some time now. I'm curious, kind of what pulled you into this space, and we've talked about VAMP, and obviously you have a lot of say in how we adapt our solutions for everybody. I'm just curious what's led you to be so passionate about this industry.
Yeah, so what's funny actually is I originally was an industry analyst and started by doing some specific analysis around some fintech startups, one of which was Tableau, which is a data analytics company that went pretty big. Long story short, I kind of fell into payments because I got really interested in and worked for an analytics company. And Tableau is actually used by MasterCard and Visa and Bank of America and a bunch of companies, and they publicly talk about it. And I sold it to them years ago. So long story short, I've always been a data nerd. I've always enjoyed that. And I kind of fell into a forensic accounting analytics role selling those products. And then Caesars Entertainment offered me a role to come work for them, did fraud analytics reporting for them, and just kind of realized that chargebacks and payments fraud, it's just data. And so that's kind of been the intersection of my career, is that I've worked right for an issuer, I've worked for a fintech that sold to them, I've kind of been all over, but the common thread for me is that I really get passionate about the data. And so I've always kind of worked for anti-fraud type companies. So chargebacks is just disproving consumer fraud with data. It's not any different than anything else. And so, right, I think I get excited about problem solving and using data. And again, that's the core of what we do with chargebacks, right? It's telling a story with data. So the role just makes perfect sense.
Now, I've got to ask you, I know those who are listening to this, just the audio version, aren't going to be able to see this, but I know behind you have a glorious bookshelf of knickknacks that would make my grandmother proud. I want to know from you, what's the one with the most sentimental value, or what's the one that means most to you back there?
Yeah, so that's the clock behind me. So that clock is about 200 years old. It's been in my family for that amount of time. And that was something that my mom and I actually restored at Works. But we restored it together when I was about 7 years old. So it's both a family heirloom, but it's also something that reflects like an actual like mother-son project with my mom. And so it's my wall, as you've noted, is all stuff from either my travels or stuff that reminds me of happy times. So when I'm working a long day, I can turn around and kind of zone out thinking about the memories.
That's so cool. That's really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, Kellen, I know joining us from the Bankful side, I know you've worked with a lot of different PayFacs, PSPs. Obviously, we're going to dive into kind of your role and experience in that. But I'm just curious about you, kind of what led you to payments. I know you've kind of had a different background. It seems like you fell into payments as well.
I did.
Can you give us a little background? Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually came from the beer business. I spent many years in distribution, and I got to meet a lot of really interesting people. And I like kind of my premier focus area was craft beer. And I was back in San Diego when I did that, where craft is kind of king. I've always had this, I guess it developed a little bit later in life because I wasn't that much about learning when I was in school. But like as I got older, I just like became fascinated with arming myself with as much information as possible. And I really dove deep into the in the beer space, in the craft beer space, and I ended up getting like the beer version of a sommelier, which is called the Cicerone. And I found it so fascinating, and I kind of evolved in kind of an educational role. I had a big sales team that I kind of automated that ran the distribution side, and I just got to travel and teach people about bar owners, restaurant owners, corporate restaurants about that. And I love the entrepreneurial spirit. So I was kind of interested and a little bit fatigued from the beer business, and wanted to figure out a way to kind of still work in that arena of education and working with entrepreneurs. And an opportunity in the payment space kind of came up where I got to take my leadership skills and try to reorg a sales team. And I got to speak with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and I get to have those type of conversations every day, whether it's a startup or in a business that's been operating for 20 years. And I just found the space so fascinating, and the payment space is ever evolving, and there's always information to kind of learn about. And then, in my role now, I kind of get to have that same type of approach where I'm educating merchants about things that are going on. I get to talk to a bunch of entrepreneurs. And the analytics side of the business was kind of fascinating as well. So it was kind of a weird change of like going from beer to payments, but sales is a universal language. You just kind of have to understand the product, and I couldn't be more happy with the switch. It's just such a fascinating business, and I get to speak without having to pay for the information with all these merchants that are successful, and kind of find out what their sauce was. And it's just a fascinating space. I'm just very blessed to be able to now be in it for as long as I have, and kind of help evolve our company into what it is at this point, and just kind of continue and drive those conversations, and that be a part of webinars with like folks like yourself. I mean, it's just such a fun, interesting space.
Yeah, remind me to get the top 10 microbrews list from you afterward. Obviously it's all Oktoberfest, pumpkin ales now. But do you have a favorite? Are you an IPA guy? Are you
yeah, I mean, being on the West Coast, we're a big West Coast IPA type of town over here. But beer. The fun thing about beer, I think, what people don't really understand is that it's occasional. So it's you can have a nice dark porter in a cold winter month with a meal, or a light Modelo on the beach somewhere. It's a fun pair, and it definitely matches the mood and the environment that you're in.
Yeah, and I'm a Midwest guy myself, so I enjoy a nice IPA from Indiana as well. Shout out Three Floyds Brewery.
Yeah, Three Floyds, it's a great brewery.
That's all right. All right, last question for you both. Halloween is next week. What's your costume? You got to have a costume, right?
Jack, what are you wearing?
I'm going as Wolverine from the X-Men.
All right, okay.
Which I'm told I can pull off quite well. I was told by a friend that I was going as Wolverine. So we have like a group costume that's several of the X-Men. So
I gotcha.
Amazing. My kids really wanted me to be Ace Ventura Pet Detective when he was in the insane asylum with his tutu and Hawaiian t-shirt. But I opted to go. My wife and I think are going to go as Fred Flintstone and his wife.
Okay.
I believe the costumes got delivered, and we'll be traversing our neighborhood with our kids, likely with an IPA in hand.
Very nice.
Very nice, very nice. I think I've got I'm going with a group that we're going as Austin Powers characters. So I've got actually my costume's getting shipped in right now. Unfortunately, the Fembot was already taken, so I couldn't do that. So I'll be Austin Powers. For some reason, nobody went with that one right off the bat. So that's
a plethora of phenomenal characters in that series.
Yeah. Well, we have morning meetings over here every day, and usually like different departments host, and we'll host over here. We always when marketing does it, we always try to make it fun. So all the costumes I have, I've already used them all at our morning Kanban meeting. So I couldn't go as a 40s detective because I was already that for one of our Kanban meetings. I can't go as a jazzercise instructor because I already used that earlier this year. So yeah, I get a whole new costume.
I'm happy that a lot of us just don't outgrow Halloween. We still, exercise our right to be goofy and have fun and kind of be poke a little fun at ourselves and have a good time.
Yeah, here especially, man. If you could see our office, yeah, well, I love it.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and dive into what everybody is tuning in for. Let's talk about what's really scaring merchants this season, and that's going to be these compliance thresholds, these TC40s, and these enumeration ratios that are all wrapped into Visa VAMP. So today we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about Visa VAMP, how it changes the rules for acquirers and merchants alike, what to expect next, and probably the most important thing, how collaboration can keep you compliant and confident. So with that, let's get right into it. We just want to set the scene really quick for what's going on with VAMP and some of the major changes, taking a look at, pre-VAMP versus what's going on with VAMP right now. So Visa's new acquirer monitoring program. It's a major shakeup from the old VDMP and VFMP systems that they had originally. So in other words, it's not just a new rule update, but it's a total reboot of how fraud and dispute ratios are going to be tracked. So before VAMP, Visa was monitoring merchants directly. It was all about merchants ratios, fraud here, chargebacks there, and acquirers were sort of in the background, so to speak. But now the tables have turned a little bit. VAMP is acquirer-led. That means acquirers are going to be responsible for every merchant under their umbrella. So just with that, Zach, could you kind of help us break down this slide a little bit for us? How does this before and after picture change the dynamics between merchants, acquirers, and Visa?
Yeah, I mean, so normally we talk about Visa making changes to the program. I think to call this an overhaul would still be a bit of an understatement. Right. It's a whole new program. Like we can talk about like this is this and that, and it's a cool infographic, but I'm not going to walk through it because the reality of it is if you're trying to understand VAMP through the lens of VDMP or VFMP, you're not doing it right. Like it's a very, very different world. And I think the biggest thing, and really why I'm excited to have Kellen here, is right, like for me, the biggest change is in the title of the program, right? The Visa Acquirer Monitoring Program. I think Visa's shifting gears a bit around how they want to be involved in the compliance conversation. And right, I think that's making it very different in terms of the relationship that exists between like a PSP and a merchant. And so, right, like Kellen, I think I'm interested in your perspective, right? Because I think the changes are listed there, but now that you guys are in more of the regulator seat, what does that look like and how should merchants be thinking about that?
Right, yeah, I mean, before VAMP, the pressure sat mostly on the merchant, right? And now it's shared, and that means education and visibility are really everything. And we focus a lot on that proactive guidance, not punishment. So I think it's important for everyone to kind of not be afraid of what's going on right now, but like understand their roles and their responsibilities and how to collaborate and be able to scale without fear, of fines or shutdowns.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think as we step into this a little bit more, right, I think we'll get into the guts of what that looks like. And I think that our next slide actually starts to do that. So at the end of the day, the way that I would kind of align on this is yesterday, it was a conversation between merchants and Visa, and right, they would maybe go talk to their acquirer because the acquirer was involved in it. That's where they get their stuff from. But at the end of the day, it was a pure compliance conversation between Visa and the merchant. And obviously, I'm focusing on Visa because they're the ones that are right. Like it's Visa's program. But I think at the end of the day now, right, Visa's talk track in the market has kind of been, well, your ratio's the same or equal, right? Because there still is a merchant to Visa ratio, right? That hasn't gone away. But I think what I want to focus in on and what I'd like your perspective as a PSP, right? I've been talking since May about the fact that if you're thinking as a merchant that your ratio is 2.2 or 1.5, which are the listed merchant ratios under VAMP, you're probably thinking about it wrong. And my perspective with that has been that mathematically, because the acquirers have to keep their portfolio at 0.7 and 0.5, you're going to start to see the PSPs play a different role, because Visa is going to say, oh, well, you're under 2.2, I don't care, and then send the PSP to go have that conversation.
Right.
And so, right, like,
yeah, it's the acquire accountability era, but where is the merchant's role in that, and how does that trickle down, and how does that affect them? You know, our approach is simple. It's educate. We like to monitor and communicate, and understanding how the acquirer threshold affects me from a merchant perspective. Let's say, how can I behave effectively in that environment? Understand what my roles and responsibilities are with the guidelines, the thresholds that I kind of you know, need to work with. And we just want to open the conversations before issues reach acquirers. It's just, if knowledge is power, right? And if we understand how to operate in our merchants, and we can have those really constructive conversations when a merchant comes up to me and says, hey, you know, I need assistance with VAMP, what we can look at, and how we can deliver that message in a digestible way that, you know, has that same talk track over 50, 60, 70, 100 conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm hearing is that, right, this is a new change for everybody, not just merchants, right? It's a new world, and collaboration is probably the best way forward, right?
100%.
So I love hearing that, right? Because that tells me that the stuff I've been talking about for the last, you know, several months is correct, and who doesn't like being right? Right. And I think, again, as we talk about this change, right, if each acquirer now has a role to enforce, that also means that potentially for someone that's multi-acquired, that they're managing to different rule sets. Right. And so I think that there's also a really important point to be made about partnering with an organization like Bankful specifically, because of where you guys sit in the equation, right? Kind of at that juncture of multiple payment processors with an overview to kind of see across. And so, right, I think it's in this new world, I would also really assert that the payment orchestration platforms or gateways of the world will have a much better vantage point because of the way that VAMP is, again, not managed at the Visa level, but at the acquirer level.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you know, I think anybody who's been keeping up with this knows that there are a ton of changes that are coming on, happening, all of which, you know, we're gonna dive into the most. But we're, you know, from if we could kind of boil them down, or highlight the top 3 changes that have happened so far. You know, we've kind of laid those out here, and also included one thing that hasn't changed, that's going to remain the same with the new VAMP updates. Now, Zach, I'll kick this over to you to kind of walk everybody through this. But what's new with VAMP, at least for these 3 major changes that are going to be happening? Can you kind of break this down for everybody so we can understand just how important these changes are?
Yeah, so we'll step into each of these a little bit deeper in the next couple slides. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each of them here, but I think, right, the enumeration ratio is brand new. We're going to spend some time on that because I think that there's a lot of people that don't even know what that is. But I think ultimately my biggest thing is that, guys, there's very little that has changed around the VAMP program. But I want to be clear, there's a lot of people that are starting to see that bleed into everything else. And so people are seeing changes where there aren't. And so your ratio is calculated different. And that makes TC40s much more important, something that maybe no one's ever looked at before at your organization. But at the end of the day, RDR hasn't changed, right? Order insights has
being proactive always wins, you know,
exactly.
And that's where RDR is such a phenomenal tool available to so many people, and understanding how that plays in your ratios.
Yeah, no, 100%, Callan. And I think the reason that I draw attention to this is I've heard, right, my perspective is I've had merchants say, well, if RDR isn't going to save my ratio, I should just turn it off. No, you don't want to turn it off. It's still helping your ratio.
Exactly.
The idea now is that, right, from my perspective, Visa is saying use all the tools in the tool belt.
Right. It's pushing everyone to act early, right? Share the data faster. Where can I get that data? What tools can I provide in real time to keep my processing ratios clean, which, you know, has a really positive downstream effect on revenue for these merchants. You know, how can I position this to get a better rate? You know, how can I, you know, you can save labor costs by having things automated and done for you. Focus in on the now and the growth. Partner with folks like us, or you know, and become educated in how I can, you know, grow my business effectively. essentially.
So I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? So yesterday, under VDMP and VFMP, your chargeback strategy or your fraud strategy could just be RDR. And
Right.
Visa's kind of said that's not enough anymore. And so now it's about having a comprehensive strategy that, again, probably comes back to collaborating with someone that's an expert like Bankful, Chargebacks 911, et cetera. But it's a strategy. It's not, oh, well, I'll just throw on compelling evidence or I'll just switch on this. It's literally sitting down and having a comprehensive look at your payment structure, where the problems exist, and then putting together a strategy.
Right. Exactly.
So as we dive into this, I think the next topic that we dig into is TC40s. And so, right, I think I'm gonna turn this into a question, right? But I want to make some points real quick, right? In my experience, most merchants aren't even tracking their TC40 numbers, right? I mean, you'll
right?
Yeah, and I mean, right. So I think Bankful focuses on a part of the market where this is particularly important. But I want to make a point here. I've spoken to enterprise organizations that have never looked at a TC40 report, and when we showed them,
I don't think a lot of merchants knew what a TC40 is before the term became popular. And I think a part of there's a lot of fear factor involved there because as VAMP has been created and it has been around for a little bit now. They're using big scary terms and words, and everyone's looking up like what's enumeration as it relates to by checkout. What's a TC40, a TC40 and a TC15, and that's why it's important to arm yourself with resources that provide you that ease and a knowledge to just it's not doom and gloom, right? It's just we gotta tighten the nuts and bolts on our chairs here. So we don't
100%. So I'm going to ask you directly, right? Because I think as a PSP, you get to see what the offerings from acquirers and that look like on this, right? Mm-hmm. So like if an acquirer is offering visibility into TC40s or TC40 reporting, right? In your experience, what does that look like?
So you're talking about when a merchant is asking us for the information?
Yeah, so right, like I think outside of like partnering with someone like Chargebacks 911, which is something that we do, right? In the absence of that, right? Mm-hmm. Like what are merchants given from their acquirers? Because I think one of the things that I find fascinating about VAMP is if you but listen to this. I'd love your take back on this. So I was at MRC San Diego, went to a session from Visa Verify, and Visa Verify on stage says, we expect that you can get this information from your acquirers. Your acquirer should be giving you your TC40s at the end of each month. And the sentiment in the room was that was news to many of those people. And I think that's kind of what I'm asking is, in your experience, is this stuff that from a processor acquirer, right, without an added level of support like what Bankful's doing, and we'll talk about this in a second, like what Bankful's doing in this area, right? Mm-hmm. But like without help, right, merchants don't get a lot from their acquirers.
You need that real-time insight, and that's why partners like yourselves are so valuable in the payment space, because to your point, mostly every acquirer is giving that information at the end of the month. And how can I access that data in real time? Because it's all about being proactive, and CB911 provides that real-time insight, and we can offer that to our merchants through our partnership. So it's our mutual collaboration that also adds that immense value to that merchant and giving them who need that real-time insight. Because, I think we'll talk about it later. I think that a lot of merchants may think that things aren't going to happen to them, and they have more of a reaction plan than a proactive plan. And, it's all about understanding where the industry is going, what does 2026 look like in this plan, and who's going to provide me the tools necessary to fortify my business. Mm-hmm. And so partners like CB911, we can offer that.
So the compelling evidence 3.0 being Visa's latest evolution in chargeback documentation. Why is this the game changer? That is, we know that it's shaking everything up, and it's helping merchants being able to defend some of these honest transactions that they see from their end. Why is this such a game changer?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm gonna not to be a stickler for details, but compelling evidence is actually not new. It's been around for a while, right? The issue is that there wasn't great adoption among the issuer base. And right, I think the reason that I'm excited about this, that top bullet point about produces issue, right? Like it introduces the idea of issuer accountability. That's an exciting concept. I think, right? Like with this change, we've been very focused on VAMP and what's happening there, but I think compelling evidence is an example of a tool that's available to merchants that basically allows them to interject in the chargeback process and say, well, hey, that customer's claim is actually not correct. Here's evidence that disproves it. And if that happens, the customer still gets their money back, but the issuer has to pay for it, not you as a merchant. And so I think that's exciting, right? Because at the end of the day, right, I don't think it's any secret, but the general perception is that issuers are a little low barrier with letting things through from a chargeback perspective. And so this is an example of a program that's specifically triggered for claims of card not present fraud, where a merchant is able to provide previous historic transactions that basically allows Visa to say, well, hey, Mr. Issuer, this can't be fraud because they've done business with this merchant before. And so, like I said, I think that to your point, we focus a lot on how painful, right, that first party misuse, first party fraud is. That's literally what this is aimed at fixing, is right, like when someone calls in and says, I don't recognize this, this is fraud, you as a merchant are able to say, well, we have an established relationship, so it can't be fraud.
It's a big win for merchants. You know, it adds issuer accountability, which is super crucial. You know, issuers are always going to typically favor the cardholder. But it's also important to understand that compelling evidence 3.0 isn't for everyone, right? And that's where your comprehensive understanding of the changes can benefit you, because you don't want your ISO or acquirer to levy, you know, a software service like this that's phenomenal for people that don't necessarily need it. And knowing what your power in the relationship is and how you can combat that will save you a lot of money from not perhaps integrating a service. But if you need the service, it's a great service. I mean, we deal with a lot of subscription merchants. We have a lot of clients that do a lot of volume with a lot of customers over the course of an extended period of time. You know, in the high risk space specifically, you know, you have like these peaks and valleys of these industries that boom really big, and the card break industry was one of those. And when you're in an online forum and you're opening up these box of cards with very valuable transactions or very high transaction counts, you know, if a customer happens to not see what he likes after the 7th purchase, you have that information available to say, hey, you know, this is just maybe a use case of the customer just didn't get what they were looking for, but they've engaged with this client. This client's operating a business. I think this is something that needs to be reversed, and it can be reversed in seconds.
To your point, right? I hear the same. There's a lot of people that'll come to me with like crazy eyes going, we need CE 3.0 right now, and they're focused on it. And right, like it's more complex than that. And I think also to your point, right, it requires transaction history. So it's not always right for everybody. If you bill your customers once a year, it's never going to meet the data pattern. If your customers are completely occasional or one time, right? Like, and so what I would say is don't just go running around chasing a buzzword. Talk to an expert, right? If you bank with Bankful, talk to your, right? If you have a relationship with Bankful, talk to your rep, right? We work with them directly. They're educated on it. If you don't, contact Chargebacks 911. But it's a tool in the tool belt. And if you don't have the data and you're not processing and handling the payment in a way that allows the service to trigger, it's a lot of wasted effort integrating for a service that's never going to do anything.
It's our job in the consultation to identify the symptoms. And once we have a comprehensive understanding of what the merchant profile looks like, what the consumer card behavior is, then we can allow us to provide the suggestions. Compelling evidence is a great tool to add when it's necessary, and I can understand that in the underwriting and onboarding aspect of it and say, hey, you know, based on your forecast, your business model, your marketing strategy, I really do think this is something that could benefit you. This is something that we should enroll in now as a measure to help you provide leverage further down the line, or simple RDR metrics or tighter fraud controls. But, allow us to dissect what's going on in the conversation. Sometimes merchants come up to us and say, hey, I have an issue with VAMP with this provider. Like, what can you do to help me? Well, let's understand what the issue is. Let's see if there's an issue in general, right? Let's look at your payment makeup. Let's look at the gateway level data that's being collected with your current partner. Because we help collect and store clean transaction in the metadata support when C3 or compelling evidence 3.0 is needed. So, it's just all about, like you said, talk to your PSP, have an honest conversation. We're not here to judge. We operate with empathy. We don't see you as an issue. We see you as a partner that needs guidance, right? And I think if you operate with empathy and you move forward in that way, you found the right partner, for one, and you're giving someone the ability to scale.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. So I think, right, like back to the whole we're navigating this together. I think compelling evidence is a new fixation for a lot of the market, but I want to call it out. Chargebacks 911 has been helping merchants integrate this product for a long time since it's been out. It's not a new product. But I think one real quick call out on why compelling evidence is a much more powerful tool under VAMP versus the previous program. A successful compelling evidence deflection doesn't just stop the chargeback, it also stops the TC40.
Right, and I think that's where people are like so excited and fixated on, is because TC40 is a buzzword.
That's what scares everybody.
Right,
yeah.
That's the scary one.
And I think you talked a little bit about, right, you can look at the business and decide if it works. What I'll say is, right, like I'm going to give us a plug. Been doing this for a long time, and I think before you go integrate for something, make sure you're working with a partner that's looked at your data to make sure that you'll qualify. Because I look at data all the time where people go, well, we've got IP address, and I go, yeah, and it's very clear that your customers use a VPN, which means it's never going to match. You can tell that by looking at the data. If you do this as often as we do, you can look at the data and be like, okay, when we set this up, it's going to work, or hey, it's not. And if you don't have that data, then it's a conversation with a partner like Bankful or CB911 about helping get you a device fingerprint or something else that will help you with that. And so again, I think what I would say is the talk track in the market is this is a silver bullet. It is a very powerful tool, but make sure that you're working with an expert that knows how to actually implement it, because the devil's really in the details when it comes to compelling evidence 3.0.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All right, so kind of where all this is coming together, and we've alluded to it before about being communicating with those that are able to see the data and everything like that, and now with acquirers being held responsible for this, that also means that they're going to be in charge of enforcing it. So collaborating, if you're a merchant, collaboration with your acquirer is more important now than ever. So with acquirers being in the driver's seat now under VAMP, merchants can't just sit in the passenger seat and just hope for the best. So it's really important to talk to them about their thresholds, what their suggested optimizations might be. So Kellen, I'm curious from Bankful's perspective, what should merchants be asking their acquirers right now to get ahead of these potential ratio breaches? Because I know all this went into effect October 1st. So ideally they probably should have been talking before all that went into effect, but now that we're nearing toward the end of October, what is it that merchants need to be talking with their acquirers about right now?
How much visibility do I have to my data? How fast can I get my visibility to my data? How can we collaborate together to eliminate any surprises during compliance reviews? We step in to translate that data into action, helping them understand ratios and patterns and next steps. But you want to find a partner that is willing to have a great conversation with you and guide you. And if you have a lot of conversations with, stuttering, and it's like, well, that's, go look at your platform provider and see what, third-party plugin tools they can offer you. It's probably not a good sign, right? Ask about the technology that's available, how fast they can get it, and what can we do together to ensure that as partners, rising tides lift all boats. How can we get there? How can I grow and make your portfolio stay clean? And how can I use my clean processing as an advantage to me?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that answer because, again, back to May, I've been encouraging people, talk to your PSP, talk to your acquirer, right? Wherever you have that relationship, have a conversation. And right, my biggest thing has been, what are your expectations, right? And if you
Right.
come to me and you say, hey, you've got a problem, what are going to be the things that I can show to you that I'm serious about fixing it, right? What would a risk mitigation plan look like?
Right.
And hey, maybe I know that my ratio isn't where I want it to be, and I can put that together ahead of time, right? Like have a plan before I get yelled at. And so that's what I'm hearing, right? Like that collaborative approach.
Right.
And I think, right, just want to call it out. If you work with a PSP like Bankful, go there. Go to the place where it's consolidated. If you work with someone like Chargebacks 911 or you work with us, by all means call us. If you don't work with someone, call us anyway. We can start working with you. I think at the end of the day, it goes back to this idea that you need to have a plan, and
Right.
that plan needs to tie in with the other people that have skin in the game. And I think as a merchant, you've been told that's your acquirer, right? They're going to be your new parole officer, so to speak, in terms of checking in on you with this. Because, right, and I both hate the metaphor and like the metaphor, right? Because like the parole officer doesn't work for Visa, but they're enforcing Visa's regulate, right? Like it kind of works, right? And so it's a conversation that you'll be having with your acquirer, but it's still about the rules that Visa is subjecting the acquirer to. And so I think collaboration is really, that's been what I've really called out since the beginning. But right, like if I had to bullet point it, right, it's ask your acquirer or your PSP when, right, what information is available, what they expect from you, and hey, if there is a problem, what does that look like in terms of like, do my mids get yanked? Do I have a chance to?
Are you gonna put the eviction notice while I'm sleeping and I wake up to a bunch of declines for an invalid term ID? You know, how are you gonna help me? You know, let's work together to eliminate this. Because not everyone's susceptible to it. You know, we're operating an e-commerce store, right? Stuff may happen. It may never happen, but you want to be prepared and you want to ensure that you're with somebody that's there to support you. Like I said earlier, it's like we see this more, you know, it's like operating with empathy. It's like we're not treating them as a problem. We're treating them with a partner that needs help. And how can we help them? And if you're not getting that reaction, and I think everyone will get that good reaction. It's like, imagine how great an acquirer will feel when someone comes up to them or a PSP is like, hey, how can we, like, what can we do to tighten the reins here or process clean? And that's probably music to a lot of people's ears. A merchant that is thoughtful enough to think about that.
So I think I'm gonna, you've said operating with empathy a couple times, and so I'm gonna just tell a story because I think that that's a big deal. There's a merchant that I work with, right, in my capacity, in my role at Chargebacks 911, that was getting ready to start splitting some processing and start working with a new acquirer. And in the middle of VAMP, they woke up to exactly what you were talking about. Bunch of decline codes, they had their mid, no notice, zero, none. They were given the notification when they were turned off.
Right.
And right, this is by the way, this was 3 months ago. This was before VAMP was actually rolled out and enforced. And so, right, like I think that that's a story that I would call out. Like,
right, if your ratio spikes, you educate first. You know, don't penalize, figure it out. But that also goes to like when you're on the phone with your acquirer, I think a lot of people are really afraid. A lot of merchants are afraid to like be a little bit more vulnerable and honest about what their business model is because they really want that approval.
Yep.
But to your point, when you're going through the onboarding a process with a partner that you haven't done as much homework on, they may not support your model, right? And their underwriting policy could be a light touch underwriting, get to a certain point of processing, and that triggers a true underwriting. And then they establish that you're not in their risk acceptance policy. We hold funds, close doors, whatever the case may be. You know, not everybody supports every business model. There's reputational risk, equity risk, regulatory risk, and every bank behaves in a specific arena. So it's more important to be open and honest about your business model because as long as it's legal, there's going to be someone that's going to be able to underwrite your business. And I'd rather have a merchant spend the time and find the right partner to allow them to scale, as opposed to opening and closing and opening and closing. And that's where we really come into a great place, because we work with so many different acquirers. We have so many banks that will allow you to operate, will underwrite you appropriately, give you scale. And as long as everyone's open and honest, you're gonna find the right partner.
I'm gonna cut in to also just give a plug to, right, like I think PSPs also play a really important and valuable role in situations like this, because I've had an issue where a merchant had someone reach out, or had their PSP reach out and say, hey, your sponsor bank doesn't have appetite for your risk portfolio, but we're going to help you find, right? And it wasn't a conversation. It was a conversation about losing mids, but it was a conversation about, but we're going to move you over here. And I think, right, like your acquirer isn't going to call you and have that conversation, because they either have appetite for it or not. You're either in or out. And so I think it also raises some interesting value around being able to work with a PSP who can kind of help manage that, because in that situation, working with a PSP, that merchant that I'm referring to didn't incur an outage, because the PSP was able to negotiate that the mids didn't turn off until they had a place for the volume to go.
Yeah,
and so
our mission has always been to support the underbanked. And I think that's why we've kind of evolved over the last 15 years into where we are now, because if you have the maneuverability and a roadmap plan to kind of, it's kind of like that. I live in Los Angeles, right? So it's the earthquake, people got earthquake preparation kits. If you have a partner that kind of has a little bit of a preparation kit for you, where they can, provide you with additional resources to continue your business, you're at the right spot, right? And so we love where we're sitting at this point, because there's that cheeky kind of, we're not superheroes by any means, but we have partners that will support essentially everything. And, we can provide backup support, when needed. We can provide the backup car when the main car breaks down is in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
No, I love that. And I think what I would say is I've seen that in play firsthand with a merchant. So
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect, guys. All right, well, we're going to sort of go over to the high-arching remarks that we've gone through in the webinar so far. I will say, before we get into these key takeaways, if you have any questions about anything that we've covered, go ahead and put them in the chat right now. We're gonna get to a Q&A portion after this, but just in case we can't get to everyone's questions, we definitely want to follow up with you guys afterwards. So anything that we went over that you have a question on, please throw it in the chat. We'll also put up our contact information here toward the end with both of our companies' emails, so you can reach out that way. But please, if you have a question, do not hesitate to reach out. So I know we've covered a lot of ground today. Some of it might be new, some of it might be updated information. If you guys are keeping up with the new VAMP program. But basically, in a nutshell, acquirers are now accountable under VAMP, but merchants are still feeling the impact of it. So taking a look at that, and also real-time data visibility is crucial now more than ever. We were talking about getting those TC40 monthly reports. I think it's safe to say that merchants should be beyond that and should be looking at these fraud notifications in real time. So no longer can wait for monthly reports. You got to be reacting to those things now. Enumeration ratio, this adds a whole new element, a whole new compliance layer. So catching that card testing fraud early, if it's happening, is going to be critical, especially to how Visa is going to be, sort of clamping down on that. And most importantly, that we went over, collaboration between merchants, gateways, and acquirers. It's no longer optional. It's honestly it might be the only way to stay compliant right now, is to open up those lines of communication, ask those questions, make sure that you're prepared beforehand. Kellen, I love the analogy that you gave. Don't put the security system in the home after the break-in. Make sure you have that up front. So before we kind of dive into the Q&A portion, Zach, Kellen, any final thoughts on this? Any key takeaways of your own that you want the attendees to walk away with?
Yeah, I think merchants really do need to understand what their role is and how it affects. And I think, the more questions they ask, the more, there's so many resources out there where you can find, you have so much more easy access to information now with, just ChatGPT's free, offering, there's so many tools out there, partnering up, with Bankful. We provide our merchants a lot also with real-time insight. It's like, I think a lot of merchants don't understand what forums they can go to kind of really understand the changes in real time. We're often writing blogs, putting out LinkedIn content, and we really encourage our merchants to follow us. Follow, your partners on LinkedIn. It also gives you real-time information on maybe decision changes that they're making. So, get yourself, this is your industry. It may be running in parallel with you, may not have a direct interference with a CBD merchant, but everyone behaves in the same arena. Visa's making the rules, the officers of those companies are all going to make sure people are compliant. So there is, ways that you could be affected. So following the right resources is going to help you long term, because there's always going to have some trickle down effect.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'll say too, right, is a comment that Colin made before. We all kind of move up or down together, and I think this is a new thing for everybody involved, acquirers, PSPs included. And so I think the biggest thing is collaborating, communicating, and recognizing that, again, all of our actions have a larger cumulative impact, right? Because again, as an example, higher engagement and compelling evidence makes it better for everybody, right, as a product. And so I think, again, reach out to those experts that you have in your portfolio, right? Like Bankful or Chargebacks 911. And if you don't have an expert in your portfolio, I think that's the takeaway. You should be working with one. Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Let's go ahead and tackle a few questions that we've received so far. And again, if you haven't submitted yours yet, go ahead and do so now. And again, we'll put some contact information here at the end to follow up with us. But let's dive into some of the questions that we've been asked so far. So first one that we get is, how can merchants monitor their VAMP performance if they don't have direct access to their acquirers' ratios?
So I think we said this before, actually, it was kind of like layered in. Work with, right, so if you're a customer of Bankful, reach out to Bankful. You can get it from them in partnership with us. If you don't have a relationship with Bankful, talk to Chargebacks 911. But right, like that's where you talk to that layer above your acquirer, and right, Chargebacks 911, I'm going to plug us. We can help you. If you have a relationship with Bankful, you already have access to us. But that's that real time, right? Every day you get to see your ratio. You can manage it proactively because you're not getting the, hey, you blew your ratio at the end of the month kind of thing. And then also that reporting is pretty cool because it won't just show you your percentage. It shows you how many TC40s, how many TC15s, and then that way you can
very much more detail. Visibility empowers smarter adjustments. So have access to that, and then you'll be in front of a lot of formal warnings.
No, well said. All right, next question we have is, what are the most common mistakes merchants are making right now under the new VAMP framework?
Yeah, I get this. I have a lot of conversations about this. So if you don't mind, Zach, I'll start off with this one. I think because VAMP kind of highlights acquiring monitor program, that the merchants don't understand their role in the relationship, and assuming that VAMP is only for the acquirers is a mistake. Ignoring friendly fraud until it affects your thresholds is another mistake we make. Understanding what friendly fraud is and the impact and the overall ratio of how that is from the fraud whole sector itself. Protecting yourself is super important. Having a distinct billing descriptor. To your point, we earlier, Zach, we have merchants that have multiple acquirers. You need a distinct billing descriptor for your URLs, because if you have a singular one across all your mids and an alert hits, and it happens to be with acquirer one, you're getting a TC40 perhaps 4 times, and then the TC. So it's like it quadruples your ratio. Have a great billing descriptor. Have good refund policies. Have clean checkout practices. But everyone's role is important. Collaboration is key. You know, your acquirers are being held to a certain standard. They're going to hold you to a certain standard. So let us help you understand how you can fix that. And I think if you rectify that immediately or identify it in the qualification process, you know, we can definitely save yourself a lot of pain and angst.
So my answer is kind of similar. I think I would say that the mistake is that people are trying to use the same techniques that worked yesterday,
Right.
without understanding that it is truly different. And what I mean with that is right, like if you have a fraud problem and your strategy yesterday for fixing your ratio was refunds, that doesn't work because Visa is saying they don't want you to accept that transaction anymore. And so, right, like you've got to do something, and that implies, right, if you have a fraud problem,
Right.
that might mean AVS CVV changes. That might mean, right, all kinds of stuff that's not just a chargeback or an after the fact problem. And so I think what I would say is I see people making the mistake of thinking about this as they can clean it up after the fact versus actually digging in and fixing the problem.
Right. I also see a lot of merchants, and this is a tough one, when they get the chargeback and their account's been debited, they go ahead and refund the merchant or the customer again. And it's like, you got to understand that the chargeback is the forced refund, essentially.
Yeah. And the customer will take a double refund happily.
Right, exactly. And we see that often. And it's because, you know, you're not armed with the right information. And when you're onboarding with Bankful, we're going to understand what your business model is. We're going to educate you on, you know, if you're a startup, we're going to let you know what the landscape looks like and what we recommend to make sure that you're buttoned up and understand the power of the tools and how to manage the power tool. And then if you're an existing merchant with a VAMP problem, we're going to dissect it. We're going to understand what the symptoms are, and we're going to prescribe something that is going to heal the situation. So don't refund after a chargeback.
Yeah, and Kellen, to the point that you made earlier about checking your billing descriptors and everything, especially if you have multiple accounts, knowing where it's coming from. That is, we did a survey of cardholders. We published a report a couple months ago, but the cardholder dispute index. Those cardholders that we surveyed, 80% of those who had filed a chargeback within the last 12 months did so because of an unrecognizable billing descriptor.
Right.
And then whenever we surveyed merchants, you know, about half of them didn't know what their billing descriptor appeared like. So that is a very simple step. If you can get with your account rep to find out how that's displaying, that's something that could very easily stem, you know, chargeback misuse, or, you know, people purchasing something not recognized, you know, especially if it's showing up as a parent company, but you're doing business as something else. It's a very easy way to stem some of that chargeback misuse. We even know some merchants who actually put their customer service phone number in that because, you know, it makes it so if there is a dispute with the charge, they end up calling that number rather than calling the bank if it sits right there. So be sure to check out what those descriptors look like so you can optimize those. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, just a few minutes left, so this will probably be our last question. This one is, what practical steps can merchants take today to reduce their TC40 counts and stay under the threshold? I know we kind of went over this a little bit, but let's just reiterate this.
I think some of the answers to the previous question, you know, can potentially bleed into the answers to this one. Because friendly fraud is such a big part of it. Distinct billing descriptors are super important. You know, velocity limits to stop repeat fraud attempts perhaps is a good way to do it. Good, clear refund policy. Small fixes prevent big problems. You know, most fraud is preventable. And I think that, you know, you have a good conversation, you can really reduce those TC40 counts. And having that visibility to put together a remediation plan is equally important.
Agreed. I think a lot of times people look at it and they get overwhelmed because it's a big mess because they've never done anything with it. But the other thing that I'll say is one of the biggest and most practical steps you can do to reduce your TC40 account is start consuming a TC40 report and actioning your TC40s, because a lot of times what happens is you'll get a TC40, right? Like, or as an example, we have people that'll get a TC40 and they'll refund it, but they don't check for future billings. And so they'll bill the the person again in 10 days and they'll get another TC40 because of it. Some issuers even have automatic processes that just create the TC40 because there's an existing one on that descriptor. And so, right, like you're creating your own problem by not addressing it. And so don't be overwhelmed, get a report, look at it. And then again, we've said this so many times, it's a dead horse, but collaborate with someone that's an expert because TC40s are just part of the equation.
Yeah, and if compelling evidence 3.0 is a tool that would benefit you, let's get going with CE 3.0.
All right, our next question that we get, enumeration ratio is new and confusing for many. What early warning signs should merchants or gateways watch out for, I guess, to understand if they're experiencing an enumeration attack?
So I think we talked about this. Oh, sorry. I think we talked about this in the session, right? Your enumeration has to live inside of your declines. So the easiest thing, if your decline rate is below 20 points, you don't have a threshold issue for enumeration, right? I think that's the easiest warning sign. I think, Kellen, you mentioned this before too, right? Fluctuations or spikes, changes that can't be explained by operational changes in your payments flow are also something to look for as potential like enumeration events. But generally, what I would say is I think because it's new, this is really scary to people. Most customers, if they have an enumeration issue, are aware that there's a problem because they have a decline issue.
Right. I think, I mean, a lot of, business owners are aware of their transaction history and what's going on. And I think, as you start to evolve and your business grows, you start understanding what the abnormalities is, just like you would with anything else. So, just large sets of small value transactions in a short window, surges in card declines or authorization attempts, you get the picture quick.
Yeah, definitely red flags to be on the lookout for if you're seeing those.
Right.
All right. Next question that we received, how will VAMP impact smaller or high risk merchants differently from large enterprise merchants?
Yeah, we work with a lot of small merchants, smaller merchants, startups, however you want to call it. I think, the impact is really, smaller merchants face less tolerance due to lower transaction counts. So because of that, your ratios could increase because, you perhaps had chargeback increases. You run 100 transactions a month. That's great and exciting for a startup business. But if you're partnering up with a fulfillment center that can't drop ship those orders on time, you might be experiencing 10 chargebacks, which is a 10% ratio.
Yeah.
So a few chargebacks can push those ratios higher quickly if you're not, having a ton of counts or transaction counts. We help those small merchants by educating them early and monitoring things. Risk is a little bit higher, but so is our support level. So I think that, when it comes to having that conversation with your PSP, which we've talked about so many different times, it's understanding like, what's your transaction count look like? What's the go-to-market strategy? And how does this impact? And what's the tolerance level for a startup? Making sure that that merchant is partnered up with the right partner that will have that tolerance level is super important. But I think that's where I see a lot of the impact.
Perfect. All right. And then the last question that we've received, are there any more planned changes coming to Visa VAMP? I would assume so, maybe some that are planned, some that might not be, but we're expecting updates in the future. But yeah, any insights you guys have to VAMP updates?
So I think that there's none that are official or announced, but I would be shocked if as we continue through the next 12 to 16 months that we don't see incremental adjustments. I think I've been pretty consistent from the beginning on this. VAMP is happening, right? The ratios are the ratios. I think if you see changes, it might be changes on like how much a breach event is going to cost you, when they're going to start enforcing that stuff, those types of things. So for those of you that might be hedging or asking this question, hoping that VAMP is going to go away, it's not. Right. But I think what I would say is stay tuned because this is going to continue to evolve for sure.
Yeah, it's not static. It's going to continue to evolve. And, like the changes in April that are coming up next year, it's like there's more issuer accountability, you know?
Yep.
So how is that going to affect us? We already know that that's coming. That's been labeled. That may change. But yeah, it's an evolving door. And, you know, work with us, get ahead of the curve, and get that real-time insight.
I think the other thing with this too is make sure that you're using your voice in this time, right? Like talk to your PSPs who can be, right, like who can be your voice in a larger room, attend member organizations and go to the Visa Verify sessions and raise your hand and provide feedback, right? I sat in the one in San Diego and merchants have opinions, but
Right.
Visa's actually asking for feedback. And I would be remiss to think that they're not going to take that into effect at all. And so, right, like get engaged, even if you look at it and you go, oh my God, I'm so far away from where I need to be. That's more reason to be engaged, not a reason to give up and go home, right? Because at the end of the day, I think what I like seeing is when you've got merchants that are serious about fixing it, they're doing all the things that are being asked and they still have ground to go, right? Those are the use cases that I think will wind up helping. And so if we do see changes come, I'm optimistic that it'll be in response to the feedback to that the merchants, acquirers, and issuers are providing to Visa. But again, I think it's a matter of what's the timeline look like, not whether or not it's going to happen.
Right.
And I think even with phase 2 rollout in April, I think that they have planned for lower excessive threshold rates as well. Yeah. So, you know, if you're setting that target now, you're going to have to lower it.
I've been talking about 0.5 since the beginning, man. Technically, it's 0.7 for acquirers right now. But here's the thing. We've also seen notices from sponsor banks where they're setting the targets at 0.5, which is the right way to do it, because then you don't have to change it.
You didn't have to, yeah, exactly.
You know, manage
where the puck's going, make your modifications now, so you're not like creating more. Nobody likes to be, modify their business in a way to support it, to only have to remodify things down the road.
Well, imagine if you were running a race and nobody told you that it was a relay race. So, right, you get to the finish line and they're like, just kidding, one more lap. Right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's not fun.
Yeah,
good analogy.
100%. 100% what it is. That's great. I'm going to use that. Yeah, that's good.
All right, and that wraps up today's episode of ChargeForward with Chargebacks 911. Huge thanks and shout out to Zach Matthews from Chargebacks 911 and Kellen Rayner from Bankful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on Visa VAMP program and for keeping it just a little less scary than it sounds. If you'd like to learn more about how VAMP is reshaping acquire and merchant compliance, be sure to check out the full webinar replay. We do go deeper into those real world examples, the data, Q&A. You can find that at chargebacks911.com or wherever you're listening to this episode at as well. And as always, if you have any questions or topic ideas that you'd like us to cover or any stories that you'd like us to unwrap, go ahead and drop us a message or connect with us on LinkedIn especially. We'll be happy to respond to you guys. And don't forget to subscribe to ChargeForward at Chargebacks911 to make sure that you never miss an episode.